Hey, what's going on, guys? Back for another edition of We Talk L.A. And today I am very excited to have food and travel journalist Kristie Hang with us. She is not only probably the foremost expert I can think of on all things food related in the San Gabriel Valley, but also the person who I think is the most addicted to boba I have ever met in my entire life. Kristie, what's going on? How are you doing?
Hey, how are you? Not much has changed this whole quarantine. I think we're on month two, and yeah, it's tough, but we're getting through it.
Yeah, it's a familiar conversation I'm having a lot of people when I bring them on here. It's kind of like, yeah, I'm doing pretty well, but it's just things are weird or things
Yeah.
are things are a little more stressful than usual. I wanted to have you on because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the San Gabriel Valley, or at least newsworthy stuff in terms of how the food culture is surviving there, given these uncertain and pandemic times that we're living in. But also like how the folks there kind of adapted early to what was happening with COVID, and maybe vis-a-vis being immigrants or first generation Asian Americans having some contact back with folks in China, and basically being preparing a little bit more in advance, and maybe how that's played out. So those are kind of broadly the two topics I wanted to speak with you about today. Maybe we can start though, just if people are unfamiliar or unversed in sort of the story of the San Gabriel Valley and why food is so important to that culture. You can kind of take us through and talk to us about the myriad ways that food is tied into the SGV.
So I think demographic wise, the SGV has the most Chinese people outside of China here in the US. And so just talking about strength in numbers, you can actually find food that is more authentic sometimes in this SGV than in some parts of Asia and even China, depending on where you're looking. And so it's always been this place where immigrants can come and share their culture and share their food with the rest of the people here in LA and California. And if you're a normal person visiting the SGV, it's quite a regular sight to see license plates from all over the different states driving in on the weekends to get their food to go and driving back to their states. So SGV has always been a food mecca, and we've had so many immigrants in the last 10, 15 years that were from mainland China. And prior to that, a lot of the immigrants were Taiwanese and people from Hong Kong. And now we're just kind of this hodgepodge of different Chinese cultures. We also have a lot of the Japanese Americans that stayed here after the internment camp split out. So we just have a lot of great Asian culture in the area, and that kind of has translated to great food for everyone. And this has been the place to go if you're in Southern California, at least.
Yeah, you and I were talking about before we started taping that a lot of the immigrants that come in may not have the same educational level as second or third generation folks who lived here, or people who've lived here for a long time. So
Mhm.
service industry jobs end up being where a lot of these folks are placed, and that comes out if they know about food. That comes out in the form of mom and pop restaurants and other small businesses that if you have a little bit of hustle and just a little bit of know-how, it's easier to start that up than it would be getting some sort of formal job that will require more education. I think maybe we can talk through a little bit about specifically some cases of restaurants that are surviving or not surviving, given the pandemic circumstances that they're all facing.
Sure. So restaurants that I think are surviving on the surface level might not actually mean they're surviving, quote unquote, because people have been saying, oh, let's purchase something from them. We're helping out. It's not that you're not, but there's so much cost that goes into it. That doesn't really mean you're helping to keep the restaurant afloat necessarily. So people were like, go buy gift cards from them. It's like, our restaurants don't have gift cards. Everyone's like, oh, just use credit card. It's cleaner. It's like, well, some of the restaurants don't even have a credit card policy. So we're using cash only. And you see them disinfecting the cash and everything on the counters. The SGV just has a bunch of restaurants that have currently started opening up again. Not everything was open, although we did have a lot more choices than other cities around in LA. And I think May 1st was the first day where there were some big mom and pop restaurants that are really well known that started opening up again, where I was like, okay, this is more normal. But for the most part, people have been very clean. People have been really good about wearing gloves and just being very strategic in how they hand out the food, no contact, pop your trunk, throw it inside for you. Everything has been going on, I would say, since early February. But for me, living here, I started hearing about the situation and I kind of didn't even believe them because I'm like, okay, as everyone else did, this is happening around the world. I just couldn't imagine being here in LA and SGV having to deal with the same things. But in SGV, it's not weird to see someone with a mask on a regular day. You have the hipsters who want to wear the mask to take some great photos because they think it looks cool. And then you have people who are actually sick and want to prevent other people from possibly getting sick. So for many, many years, it's been a norm here. And for even longer, at least 15 years, it's been the norm in Asia. So for me personally, since mid-January, I've heard about the virus. And I had family here visiting for Lunar New Year from Hong Kong and from Canada. And we all convened in SGV for Chinese New Year. They were going out and trying to buy all the masks they could. And they were going out buying all the hand sanitizer they could. And I thought they were crazy. We have a box of masks at home just because, but they were going to Bed Bath & Beyond. They picked up about 120 bottles of the small hand sanitizers, and they looked crazy to me. And now I know they were right. and I think that's the attitude a lot of other people have as well, because for the longest time, our government was telling us, you don't need masks, they don't do anything. And also the fact that Asians and Asian Americans were being harassed for wearing masks for the longest time, until mysteriously, in 2 weeks' time, that attitude completely changed. It went from, you have the virus, which is why you're wearing a mask, to how dare you not wear a mask. And this whole time I'm like, have you not seen everyone else in SGV that's been masked up since, late January, early February? And everyone's hopped on the train now, but as usual, Americans are very behind the curve when it comes to fashion sense and also any other trends coming from Asia.
Yeah, when you and I were trading emails in the run up to this discussion, I had shared some numbers with you from Los Angeles County Public Health, and like going through the infection rates in different incorporated cities and neighborhoods of Los Angeles. You look at the average case rate per 100,000 individuals in cities like Arcadia, San Gabriel, Monterey Park, Alhambra. They're all much lower, like by a factor of like 2 or maybe 3 sometimes, compared to what the average looks like in the rest of the county. And I got to say, I mean, I'm not an epidemiologist. There's a lot of reasons why that could be the case in terms of spacing out, and there's a whole, like, how the population is how close in contact they are generally, how dense it is. But that anecdotally, that is an interesting factoid to put together with what you're saying about how there was a lot of early adoption of sort of like what we now consider to be best practices, right? From the public health is like, always wear a mask if you're out doing essential errands, like maintain your distance, be aware if you're sick, you need to stay away from others, all this kind of stuff, which seems like common sense at this point, right? But it wasn't the case for months leading into this. So that's interesting to put those kind of data points together. You had written a piece for Eater LA back in late March where you sort of identified some of these trends. So I kind of want to come back to that a little bit and be like, and see, are there restaurants that were, you had said that some just opened up back up at the beginning of May, right? Maybe had taken some time off to adjust to new protocols or new, pivoting to takeout or delivery or whatever it might have been, instead of doing their normal dine-in service, their normal menu. Have you seen any specific restaurants that have closed up for good since this started, and or are maybe closed indefinitely and may or may not be coming back, that are kind of like staples within the SGV?
Yeah, I think Seafood Village, I believe is the English name. They closed up early, and they just said, we're not coming back, we're done. And I think I've talked to different owners about that knew them, and they were saying, of course, they had problems prior to this pandemic, but this exacerbated it times, 10-fold, 11-fold, whatever you want, because all these problems came out and they said, we're just calling it quits, we're throwing in the towel. Other restaurants that I was surprised by, Henry's Cuisine also wasn't doing amazing before the pandemic, but it definitely could have survived, I personally think, for another year or two had it not been for this. They decided, they were closed since the beginning, opened back up recently this week for 2 days and then closed again. So I'm not really sure what's going on there, but I'll have to investigate and see what's going on. And also there was one more. Oh, I'm very surprised that Summer Rolls, which is kind of an institution in SGV, has not been open during this whole time. Them and Golden Deli, but Golden Deli just opened back up on May 1st. So I'm very interested to see and to learn about why they did not open back up. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think I've been keeping tabs on what's open. And honestly, I think it might be easier to keep tabs on what's closed because so many places are back open.
Yeah, they're trying to make a go of it. I think it remains to be seen whether or not they can make the margins work over a longer term. This was a conversation I had with, Chef Royce Burke a couple of episodes ago on the same program about like the razor thin margins that restaurants deal with anyway. And now you're throwing layers of loss at them that are going to further complicate that. So I think some of those restaurant owners that you're talking about that just threw in the towel, it was probably not a winning proposition before, and now for sure it's just like we just got to cut our losses at this point. There's also, I guess, there's a couple of things I want to get into. So first, who you called out to something that's like a staple or like a cornerstone of the food culture there, but that could be different if you're a local versus somebody who like visits the SGV as almost like a food tourist because you read pieces that Jonathan Gold wrote a long time ago, or the places that have been popularized by him or other local publications. Those ones you said seem to be doing a little better than the ones that maybe are more like, I don't know, hidden gems or just like local establishments, I guess would be the better way to frame that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think places that Jonathan Gold kind of put on the map for people who aren't from SGV necessarily have been doing okay. I think people have been kind of stir crazy at home, so they've been willing to make the drive over the SGV.
I have done that. Kristie, my wife and I have done that for sure. Absolutely, I can attest to that experience.
So I think they've been doing an okay job, but for the mom and pop shops that don't have that tension, that aren't so social media savvy, it's been pretty sad seeing them try to survive, because just because you're patronizing them doesn't mean you're helping them make rent. We've seen that viral picture of how much Grubhub takes from restaurants. Not only are these mom and pop shops that don't know anything about social media having trouble, they don't even have a Facebook page to start. Their Yelp page is probably terrible, like 2 stars, because people were like, oh, bad service, doesn't speak English, compared to how people usually review things on Yelp. So before this pandemic, they had a local audience that was helping them out, that knew their food was good and didn't care about necessarily what the venue looked like or the ambiance. But now you've seen them having to transfer and use these delivery apps because people don't want to go in. Not only are the delivery apps taking so much of the margin, but they now have to run specials to compete with that. So I've seen a lot of mom and pops say, hey, we'll give you 25% off. You come in and pick up the food. So then they don't have to give that money.
Right. They're competing against themselves because they don't have the infrastructure or the POS to create their own delivery network, right? They have to rely on these third parties to run the delivery for them.
Right. So not only are we in a pandemic, but you're making a crap ton of food to try to sell, and you're making more and more, but that's not bringing in the money because you have to charge less and less and you're getting paid less and less for it. So I don't know how many of these restaurants are going to survive after this.
Right. And yeah, I mean, you pointed to it. It's a lot of it has to do with like marketing. How is this either via press that a place has gotten, or just like having savvy about social media, and being able to promote yourself on that. Now there is like a Facebook kind of like collective that you're a part of, that has been helping some of the establishments get more attention and sort of identify what's open and what's not. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I believe it's called SGV Foodies or something to that effect. And there's been many people, many locals that have been joining and posting um, special menus, special discounts, and places that they've been going and patronizing, putting up a picture of it, details of it. And it's actually been more useful than Yelp, I think. Uh, Problem with that is certain people are going once again to the popular establishments that don't really need their help. Places that also they've been reading from Jonathan Gold that have already have their foot, they're already popular in SGV. So these places, these people as well might be kind of hesitant to go to the mom and pop places that kind of look like a dump prior to the pandemic, just because they may be scared that they're not using as good, cleanliness practices or whatnot. So even in the group, it's a great resource. There's food trucks in there. There's people making deliveries. There's home cooks that are making things at home and delivering them. It is a great resource, but the problem still remains that these smaller places don't really have the clout to get people to go.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of like whatever inequalities or differences existed before the pandemic started, this is just like blowing those up even more. So if the operator of a mom and pop, or the family isn't, if English isn't necessarily their first language, like you said, they're not going to be as savvy on social media with an English speaking audience, right? Because they're just going to be afraid to use that platform and feel like they might be, either they don't know it or they might embarrass themselves on it, I think. But then that also plays a role in, if they're trying to get access to like SBA loans or like PPP funding and things like that, like resources that are made specifically for their kind of business, and they don't have necessarily the resources or the education to follow through on that, or they were denied because they were too small a business, so they didn't get in front of the line quick enough. Now again, there's another layer of inequality that exists for them, and it's another hurdle that they have to go over, versus a bigger business who maybe is run by second or third generation Asian Americans. Maybe they're ahead of the curve on that. I don't know. It's an interesting discussion to be had about that.
There is also a big distrust of anything government funded as well. I remember talking to some some restaurant owners prior, when they're talking about the program, we can get you loans, and it hadn't been rolled out yet. And I was like, are you going to apply for it? And there's like, things like that aren't meant for us. It's not something that we would do. We don't trust that. What if there's some other thing that we have to pay back about, despite first of all, not having proper translations for people who don't have English as their first language. And even if English is their first language, it's not, that jargon is not the
I could tell you firsthand as a business owner who had to navigate like the PPP applications and SBA stuff. I was confused, and a lot of stuff was unclear because they hadn't put out clarifications on specific types of businesses or specific types of entities, and how you're supposed to calculate how much you can apply for and what documentation you need. It was very stressful and very confusing. And I feel like I'm a fairly well-educated, an English first speaking individual. I can only imagine somebody who doesn't have those things, like you said, may have a natural distrust of government, how they're supposed to navigate that kind of situation.
Right. And I think that's just where we are today. I think it's everyone for themselves, every man for themselves, and no one knows how it's going to turn out. But they keep hustling every single day, and hopefully they can make it through this. But it's really sad to see businesses that have been in business for multiple generations right now hanging by a thread.
Yeah, I guess that's a second or third level effect of what we're going through with the pandemic, is that there's a really deep loss of culture that we may not even feel because we're all hunkered down in our respective apartments or our homes or whatever right now. But like months from now or years, when everything finally does open back up, and all of a sudden there's like this desert of culture because all you have is what was really popular or really big and corporate before is all that was able to survive. And I think that's a sad prognostication of what possibly might happen in the future.
Right. In-N-Out and Taco Bell will still be there, but your local mom and pop may not.
Well, I guess if we want to try to end on on a more hopeful note, like, what do you think? Is there anything? I mean, I guess the social media folks who are coming together to try to help promote the local businesses. That's a positive we're taking away. That's an act of generosity or element of support within the community. Is there anything else that you're seeing that's kind of heartened you or give you some optimism about like how some of these places might survive going into the future?
I think just a little note. I think prior some of these the stereotypical Chinese small business is one that like kind of has really good food, throws their food at you, and gives really bad customer service. Right? Of course, that's not every single establishment, but I think walking into as someone who gets takeout maybe for 7 days of the week. When I walk into an establishment now, they're just so grateful that you're there. They want to talk to you. They want to say thank you for coming, even if it's for buying, one small dish or buying a drink. And I think that's really heartening just to see how happy they are that you're even giving them $1 of your business. Because you could go anywhere else during this time. You could be in line for In-N-Out, and a lot of people are. But the fact that people are coming together, creating these groups and telling their friends about it, to try to patronize small businesses versus going to, a big chain really means a lot. And you can really see a lot of people, whether it's going to help them in the long run or not, it's really heartening to see people try to patronize all small businesses.
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring that up. That's a point Royce really hit on when I was chatting with him again. It's about the people, right? It's about these food service isn't just about feeding people, although that is, at the core of it, that's why you make the transaction. But really, it's about having these one-on-one connections with people where you've created something, and then you're able to give that to them, and they can experience that. And like we lose a lot of that human interaction when, it's at like a mass corporate level, or it's just like big chains and things like that, where it's more impersonal. And hopefully, like you said, this does give people a reason to go back and sort of renew that that sense of cultural exchange that happens. That's at the heart of patronizing these establishments. And even if not all of them can survive, maybe that's a mindset we'll take with us going into the future.
Definitely. I mean, I hope the best. I wish the best for these places, and I hope everyone can survive. But it's a tough time out there, and I hope one day at a time. That's all we can do right now.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, that's a good note to end on. Kristie, I really do appreciate your time. Hopefully I'll have you back on again in a future episode. We can talk more once we get another kind of a few weeks or months into this in the SGV. We'll see what's going on there, and if some of these places can continue surviving. But until then, thanks again. And for everybody out there watching, we will see you in the next episode. Take care.